Welcome to the Joyful Mate podcast. Join your joyful journey mentor, Anthony Hartcher, as we explore the path to inner joy and fulfillment. Each episode we dive into the science of happiness, share personal insights, and invite you to be part of this interactive book writing adventure. You'll hear from experts in the field of joy, happiness, and fulfillment who will share their wisdom and experiences. Let's embark on this journey together. Let's make happiness part of your everyday. Welcome on the Joyful Mate podcast. How are you, Mark Butler?
Very well indeed. Thank you, Anthony, and yourself.
Fantastic. Really doing fantastic. And just to bring the listeners up to speed in terms of a little bit about you, your background, a little story, they'd love to hear that.
Right, okay. I've been working in the mental health space. Well, let me start again. I have about, 25 years in commercial corporate experience in the workplace. I had the great honor, privilege to be able to live a sort of a secret life as well, in which I was studying a passion of mine, and that was mental health. And so while I was working, I was studying. No real plan or anything behind it. I was just reading and studying and enjoying what I was doing. As a sort of an antidote to the corporate sort of world, I was studying how our mental health affects us and burnout at a time before it was even called that. And one day I looked up and I had 2 master's degrees in mental health and some research that I'd had published. And then as the years progressed, I kind of segued out of the commercial world and into the sort of treatment world. And so I've done a lot of work with veterans with post-traumatic stress, people in addiction recovery, anxiety and trauma, etc. And as a clinical director and program designer and developer. And kind of got a bit tired of being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So I segued out of that and back into a space where I was kind of bit more like the fence at the top of the cliff. So in that sort of prevention space. And then COVID came along and then that sort of changed a lot of what I did. But I am now I work internationally with organizations in upskilling leaders in having critical caring conversations, developing better teams, developing better leaders and better people overall, actually. Those are the sort of 3 main areas that I focus on.
And your interest and drive in the mental health space, where does that come from?
I think I burned out myself about 20 years ago. I also had a history of anxiety and depression as a child. But I'm 60 years of age now, and so when I was, I think about 10, it first kicked in. But 50 years ago, young boys didn't get anxiety. That was the domain of mums and housewives, according to the doctors and the specialists at the time. So it must have been depression. And as I found out later, it was a misdiagnosis. I developed anxiety. I was ill as a child, sort of thing. Pretty ill at one point in time. And so that kind of kicked in around then. And so I think that's always then led to what the hell just happened there was kind of the sort of reason, I think, why I started to explore and look a little bit deeper as to what went on. And then when I did experience what we now know as burnout, working in an organization, I kind of wanted to figure out what that was all about. So it's led me to here. And I have the great honor and privilege to work with the World Federation for Mental Health in the workplace section, where we advise the United Nations and World Health Organization and governments around the world on best practice for treatment and prevention of mental health challenges. And I am on the workplace sections of the committee. So I get to speak to and work with some of the best minds around the world. So, imposter complex kicks in hard and fast until you realize, and look, this might be useful for your viewers and listeners. Imposter complex is something we talk about that would actually deprive us of the joy and happiness of fully engaging in the work that we do. And I've come to realize that we're all just people and we're all figuring this thing out as we go. There are experts in certain fields, but they're not in other fields. There is so much that everybody has to offer, I think. So I work with this imposter complex for leaders a lot of the time and how it sucks the joy and happiness out of their lives. It prevents them from really embracing and engaging fully in what they're trying to do. So it's a really fascinating topic and I'm really interested in your podcast around this as well. Yeah,
I totally agree around the imposter syndrome because we've all experienced it. I don't think there's a single human on this earth that hasn't experienced imposter syndrome at some point or another. And
Yeah, and I think if you haven't, if you're, say, somebody who started a new role or you've just been promoted, if you're not feeling some level of imposter complex, then you're either not fully aware of what's going on around you, or you're not ready for the role. You know what I mean? If it's not stretching and growing you, what are you doing? That's the first point. And I think if you're not aware that this is what's happening for you, then I don't think you're completely in tune with your own feelings and emotions. Which is
100%.
another joy sapper, actually.
That's very true. And, part of that imposter complex is the comparison to others.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Totally is. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. But so I find myself there when it's something I talk about all the time. But then again, it's the irony of expertise, or indeed hypocrisy of expertise. I too burn out from time to time, Getting close to the end of each year, I just find I have no energy left and I've pushed myself too hard and I didn't see it creeping up, which is what happens to everybody. And I speak about it and talk about it, and I've written books on the topic, and still it happens to me. So yeah, it's emotional awareness, isn't it? It's being in tune with what's going on for us. That's the big part.
Yeah, and particularly if you really like what you're doing, you just want to do more of it, right? So you just
Totally.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, no, totally.
So, Mark, what is happiness to you?
I think it's a state. Well, first of all, happiness is an emotional response. Now, all we know of happiness, or of emotions, I should say, is they generally last about 8 seconds, right? And that's that feeling that we're responding to. Actually, let me elaborate on that a little bit, Anthony, for just a second. I speak about this a lot because very often in conversations with folks, or even people listening or watching here, will say, I'm not really an emotional person. I don't really feel emotions. We all feel emotions every moment of every day. One or more emotions at any given time. They're what drive our behavior. We think it's the thinking part of the brain, but it's not. And so I often say to people, behind every conscious action or decision or behavior, and I say conscious because there are caveats, things like habits, etc., and things like breathing and blinking that occur in our natural state we don't actually have an emotional response to. But our sort of conscious behaviors and actions and thoughts, they're underpinned by an emotion. There's going to be a feeling or a felt sense that is leading to that action. And we're responding to the emotion. And behind every one of those emotions is a need or a desire or a yearning or a want that we have from ourselves or from our environment, right? So that's the process. We have a need, something that we desire or need creates an emotion or a feeling, which creates an action. A simple explanation, I'm dehydrated. So I need hydration, I need water. So I feel thirsty. I'm feeling thirsty, I'll go get a drink. Right? So you can kind of see that pattern. And these emotional states are fleeting. They're just messages, never right or wrong. They're just a heads up that we have a need that needs to be addressed. And so happiness, just like every other emotion, with probably the exception might be sadness. That seems to last about 200 times longer than any other emotion. But the emotion of happiness can be fleeting. And so what we often call happiness is actually, I think, contentedness. And a positive sense of our own well-being and emotionally content, if you like. So that's and look, I'm explaining that because that's probably where our conversation is going to go. So my definition of happiness, probably a state of well-being that's characterized by positive emotions. I think that's probably what I would say happiness is.
And you mentioned it's a state, so it's like some people have this unrealistic expectation that they should always be happy.
On the pursuit of happiness, to quote the American Constitution, I think it's the pursuit of contentment is really what it's looking for, And we could split hairs, I suppose, couldn't we, when we talk about definitions of happiness versus joy versus contentment. And I think it's a desirable state to be in and to be ourselves. Kids often talk, actually lots of people talk about being bored as here's another sort of emotional sort of state. And to my mind, boredom is actually a low-lying anxiety. Because what it's saying is I'm not comfortable in my own skin. I can't just sit quietly and be with myself. And so it's more of an anxious state than it is I've got nothing to do. The response to that should be fantastic. I've got some me time. But lots of people they can't sit with that, and they feel guilty that they're sitting around, etc. So I think true happiness then, you'd have to align it with our values, I think. That's probably where it needs to go.
Absolutely, because when you're talking about contentment and having a level of contentment, that varies depending on where you're at. Like, I'm just thinking, if you're in the developing world, then that level of contentment is just having food, security and shelter, some basic needs. Then that brings about a sense of a level of contentment. And as you said, that could be joy. You experience that in joy or happiness. And then there's those that have shelter, food and the basic human needs, and they're looking for something else in terms of contentment.
Yeah, absolutely. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow, somebody created that as a pyramid. And even Maslow himself said, I never intended that to be a pyramid, because I don't know that any of the needs that we have are greater or lesser than any others. And so when the pyramid was created, it showed sort of things like shelter, safety, warmth, and all the rest of it kind of down at the bottom. Relationships was sort of halfway up. And even Maslow himself says, without connection and belonging and relationships, then we are nothing. So it should be down at the bottom. So I think his idea was it's a continuous loop. And where there seems to be hierarchy is, or pursuit, as you say, of looking for contentment and looking for joy in our lives. So we have to make sure the basics are covered. Am I safe? Okay, I'm safe. Now, do I have sustenance? Okay, now I've got sustenance. Now, do I have some sort of sense of bonding, like Lawrence and Nori's kind of 4 drives or the 4 motivators. There's about sort of bonding being part of that, and which is about love, connection, sharing, all of the very fundamental things that we need as humans to survive. But I wouldn't say that bonding or relationships or sort of contentment or safety is more important than food. You can't really say that, or vice versa. So we all have those needs. And you're right, though, in pursuit of something that we don't have is a natural sort of progression that we do. And I think that's what Maslow was talking about. Okay, once we've got these, right, what's next seems to be our kind of mindset,
And for me, that's driven human evolution. Like, we wouldn't be where we are today if we were content with just having, as you said, the security, and feeling safe from the predator, and then having a bit of substance. We wouldn't be talking over this technology if it wasn't for the lack of contentment or wanting things to be better.
Totally. Owen Wilson wrote a brilliant book called Belonging, and in it he talks about a conversation he had with some anthropologists. And they were talking about, now this is a very simplistic overview, right? There's a lot more going on than in his statement. But basically what he was saying was, when we evolved, when we came down from the trees and onto the grasslands, as a species, there is no way we should have survived. We were slow, we were hairless, noisy, we had absolutely no self-defense mechanisms, poison, or we don't have fangs or sharp claws or anything. We should have been the bottom of the food chain, but there was something going on that allowed us to not only survive but to thrive, and that was the ability to bond and form relationships and communities. So much so that we then created tribes, and then we sort of evolved to sort of leave those tribes and deepen the gene pool, if you like, and sort of spread out, and that's how we did it. But we did that by learning how to rely on each other. And you can see that today. Most young men today can't wire a plug. You're probably not allowed by law anyway now, but there was a time when you could change your tire and fix a puncture and all of those things. And 2 generations before that, we could grow our own food and we could go hunting. And so many people don't even have those skills anymore because we've become more and more specialized, and we're doing this one small little thing. You and I are talking about this right now on a podcast. That's what we do. We've evolved to specialize and rely on each other in order to achieve what we need to achieve. And so, coming onto the grasslands, learning to bond and to acquire and defend what we have and to understand things, these are all drivers. But also, even going back to the very basics, like we said, safety and shelter and food, it's no surprise that we get a dopamine hit from, a cold drink on a hot day, a fire on a cold night, some shelter, even procreating, sex, creating relationships, that sort of, these drives, sort of, even the anticipation of them is enough to give us a dopamine hit, that's no surprise, because if we didn't get that for seeking shelter and food and sex, etc., we wouldn't do those things and we would not survive. And I think happiness lives in there as well, looking for that sense of joy and play that we miss out on. I was reading some research just recently that talked about we have to repeat a habit something like 400 times before it's really ingrained in us. I don't think this was from James Clear's book, but somebody else was saying, yeah, you need to have this behavior and you got to repeat it nearly 400 times before it's ingrained. But if you do it during a process of play, you only need about 10 or 15 times before it actually lands. And I found that absolutely fascinating, because I equate happiness and I equate finding joy with playtime. And I think it's one of the first things that we lose when we become overwhelmed or busy or trying to keep up at work, we're stressed, etc., or we're burning out. First thing we give up is that sense of play. And it's unfortunate because it's the one thing we should really hold on to. It's the one thing that'll help us keep our sanity, if you like. Yeah.
But I can understand if we're running away from a tiger, we're not sort of, we're wanting to play with it. We're, like, yeah. Nice pussycat, nice.
Yeah. Let's have a game.
Yeah.
But, kids have an incredible ability. If you said to kids, let's play a game, they'll have a game invented with a new set of rules that favour them, but that's all right. But, they can switch into that mode really, really quickly. If you've got a dog, and I've got one here, we were talking about it before we began, as soon as I start these conversations, he's usually up on the sofa behind me where he shouldn't be. Right now he's on the ground, but if I was to pick up a tennis ball and just look at him, he would switch in. Yeah, we're on, let's have some fun, let's have some playtime. We have an innate sort of ability to want to seek it out, so something pretty bad must be going on if we want to try and shy away from it. And I think, when I say play, I'm talking about kind of spontaneous fun that has no consequences. This idea of dance like nobody's watching, right? We kind of have to be able to surrender ourselves to that, to live fully. And that's where we will very often find happiness and joy, is going to be in that. Doing that usually, in fact, always involves other people and connecting and engaging. And to do that, to surrender yourself, you must feel safe. You must trust the people you're with, or you wouldn't be in that play state. And so then you've got that sense of belonging. So safety, trust, belonging all lead to this idea that happiness and joy can be found in these places when we're feeling like that, And it's kind of like we matter in some way if somebody wants to sort of spend some time to have some joy and fun and engage with us.
And that's going to vary very much on the individual, because earlier you mentioned that it's happiness and contentment is tied to an individual's values and what's important to them.
Yeah, I think so.
Because, like, if we did a comparison as what makes you happy, what makes me happy, there'd be some similarities, like talking about mental health. It makes us both happy, right? So there'd be other things that you do that I think, nah, that's not me.
Yeah, look, here's a weird one for you. 12 months ago now, I would say. Again, as we were saying earlier, the hypocrisy or the irony of expertise. I'm somebody who speaks about burnout all the time. Found myself completely burned out and I had overstretched and overwhelmed myself. Doing work I love with people I like, it's difficult sometimes to rein that in. And so I found that I was starting to isolate a little bit. So as I say, the first thing we give up is any sense of play. So I made a very conscious decision. I said, right, from now on, finding joy and happiness and kind of playtime has got to be as high a priority as achieving financial success or whatever it is. It's got to be right up there. No excuses kind of thing. Now that almost sounds like, I'm making play as a priority, so I'm relaxing as hard as I can kind of thing, right? But in actual, what it meant to me was, instead of taking something out of my life to reduce the overwhelm, I said, I'm going to put something in. And I'm going to put in something that I really find that I enjoy doing, that I haven't done before, and see where it takes me, and I can experiment with it. And I took up archery. It just turned out, I used to be in my spin class on a Saturday morning, looking out the window of the gym when they're setting up all of the targets and stuff. And I thought, give that a go sometime. The old Robin Hood sort of complex came in, right? And I said, I've never tried it. I wonder what it's like. So then just coincidence, a friend of mine said, I'm taking my kids to archery. And I said, you do that? Yeah. So I said, I'll just come along just for a hoot. And picked up a bow and started firing a few arrows, and I was hooked. And so now, and it can be an expensive hobby, but I find myself, I've bought great equipment, and I'm getting coaching. I'm mixing with a group of people I would otherwise never have come across. I really enjoy it. It ticks a bunch of boxes. It's Zen-like, it's meditative. It's exercise, because your target's 30 meters away and you have to walk up and back, I don't know how many times in a few hours to get your arrows on. And so I'm talking with people, I'm mixing with people, and doing something I love and getting great joy and happiness from it. I enjoy getting better at it, and it's something I had never done before. So in terms of introducing something extra into my life, so doing that and then sort of increasing my exercise, I think I added about 13 extra hours into my week at a time when I was feeling burnt out and overwhelmed. But they were all stuff that I really enjoy doing, and the work didn't suffer. I got the work done anyway, and I just found that my wheels were spinning work-wise because I wasn't really giving myself time to find any kind of relaxation or joy. So if anybody listening wants to take some kind of a incentive or motivation from that, is just find something you love and do more of it. And don't worry about the other stuff. It will get done. You'll get done what needs to get done. But don't deprive yourself of happiness and joy in the pursuit of something else that doesn't give you that. It's got to be top of your list.
And what's really interesting about that story you just shared is that it came out of an element of discontentment or feeling, it means something like something's missing in my life. I'm feeling a bit run down. I need to do something to change it up. And so I'm thinking, if we have this thing of, we spoke about happiness isn't a constant state, right? It's a fleeting state that comes and goes. And same with contentment. So periods will feel content, and then others, there's something I want to do something different, something new, something with a bit of variety, something that's going to stimulate my interest. And so contentment's always evolving as well.
Yeah, I think contentment, to my mind, is that state when we feel safe, when we feel like we can trust everyone around us. Because again, trust, there's another emotion. People think, my thought process, I learn to trust people and I think about whether I can trust them or not. You've decided in 15 milliseconds whether you feel safe or not. And then we have this cognitive sort of justification thing that we do to justify our sort of sense and our feeling. And if people don't believe that, then I would say, think of a time when you felt you lost trust in somebody or something. How did it feel? Awful. It's an emotional response. We put way too much weight on our executive thinking. We think it's what separates us from the animals and all of that sort of stuff. Here's the very latest research. I'll dig out the article and I'll share it with you, Anthony, that you can put on your posts. But somebody very recently did a ton of research on how much information, sensory information, goes into our brains, how we deal with it, and then the rate of output. And this is going to freak people out. So we will take in millions of bits. Okay, so when I say bits, if you're looking at your internet broadband speed or something like that, it's measured in megabits per second. 1,000 bits per second. How many 1,000 bits per second? And say you got 100 megabits. That's 100,000 bits per second, right? That's a really good internet connection to bring information in. But in actual fact, because of our five senses, we're bringing in many, 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 many times that into our brains. Something like, depending on who you're talking to, but it's in the millions of bits per second that are coming in across all our senses, mostly the eyes. And then that has to get processed in the middle part of our brain, which is where a fight or flight response lives. So the limbic system, the amygdala are like traffic lights into our system, thalamus, etc. So that's getting in millions of bits. And then we have to process that so that we can think of what our response is. Do you know how fast our cognitive executive thinking functions at.
Multitude slower.
Yeah. 10 bits per second. So what's that? 0.001 megabits per second. Now, if you got that in your internet, you just say it's not working, it's broken. That's as fast as the cognitive brain goes. So you can see how much filtering that has to get done in order to get to that sort of point. So I say to people, the emotions that you're feeling are as a result of all the sensory information coming in. And it doesn't always lead to that conscious kind of conversation. There's so much other stuff going on. So don't try and think that we can think our way to contentment. It's something that we feel. Does that make sense?
It does. And for me, like what you've just shared in terms of how we process our sense of awareness in our brain, there's a filter that you mentioned there, and that filter also has links to past emotions. And so
that's where we get our information from. Yeah,
certain smells and sounds will resonate a positive or negative emotion depending on the experience we had way back. Yeah,
totally. And so as I say, if you're going to feel safe and you're going to feel like you trust the people around you, that sensory information is making that decision before this thing ever does. This thing will just justify the sense that we actually experience when it finally gets around to figuring out the information or whatever is filtered through. And so we feel safe, we can trust the people around us. Now we feel like we belong. And Brené Brown talks about belonging, being authentically ourselves. There's an extension beyond that now that people talk about called mattering, which is the psychology of feeling and being significant, which again is really important as a sort of a sense of, we're more than just our presence. People rely and depend on us, and we're noticed and we're needed and we're kind of nurtured, or necessary, if you like. All of these things will lead to our sense of contentment, which comes from our safety and our sense of belonging. Yeah. But if people think, oh yeah, no, I've worked it out that I can be, no, that decision was made for you way earlier with all of the information coming in. So trust your instinct. If you feel like having fun, have some fun. Don't deny yourself. If it doesn't feel like fun, stop doing it. I mean, people often ask play as an example. So what is play? What does play mean to you? Actually, Anthony, what does play mean to you? That's a good question.
Play to me is being silly,
Yeah.
Yeah, just for me, it's doing things as though no one's watching, right? And
that's the dance. Like
not worrying about judgment or what people think. It feels good to me. I'm not worried about what you think of me. If I look like an idiot, I look like an idiot. But hey, I'm enjoying myself.
I'm having a great time, and I think that's it. And I would often ask people that at conferences or when I'm speaking, and very often you'll have somebody will say, "What do I do for play?" I play video games. And I go, precursor to addiction. What else? Oh, I play tennis, exercise. But you are mixing with people. If you want to make it play and fun, play with your non-dominant hand, and have a hit and a giggle kind of thing. As you say, just that spontaneous kind of silliness, I think, is not really where it's at.
Not taking life, because we can get too serious about life, and it's sort of just getting more into the flow of just being and not worrying about whether we're achieving or accomplishing. And I think you brought that back to an earlier point, was that it's okay, don't get too hung up on the productivity or the hitting the KPIs. Do what you love, and you will deliver what's really important to you.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, we shouldn't stretch and grow and all the rest of it. That's not what either of us are saying. What I think our point is that finding joy in what you're doing, you have to enjoy what you're doing. And if you're not, then you got to find something that will give you that. It's got to be as high a priority as the shelter and and the food and all the rest of it. Because if we don't have it, we lead very, very difficult lives. And it's not related to the number of trappings that you've got, or the brand new car or the big TV or anything like that. That is not where happiness is. It's not where it lives. If that were the case, people in the slums in first world countries would all be miserable. And yet that's very often when you'll find some of the biggest smiles you'll ever find are in places like that. So, it's about finding what it is. And sometimes it might be about stretching yourself to find it. Get outside your comfort zone a little bit to find what you do actually enjoy. You know, James, I think it was James Clear said, like, look, there's never a perfect time to do something that stretches you, because if you were ready for it, then it wouldn't be growth. And I think you can apply that to finding the things that bring you joy and happiness. Sometimes you have to look for them. They don't all organically come to you. Nice when they do, but sometimes it might be a question of looking for it. Like, I wouldn't, nobody was going to bring archery into my world, and it might sound a bit geeky and all the rest of it, but actually it's an incredible, the range and breadth of people who do this, and some do it for hunting, others do it for target practice and all the rest of it. Or like me, I just do it because I kind of enjoy the sense of achievement and mixing with people I hadn't met before and doing something I hadn't done before.
Yeah, it's the spice to life, like it's just that
totally.
Variation to the routine.
Yeah.
Bit of stimulus, different stimulus. And in order to find that, you had to have an element of curiosity, right? So you're curious. You're on the spin bike, looking outside and thinking, archery, I really don't know what would it be like. I'm going to try it.
It looks a bit dorky. And then I thought, yeah, but maybe I'm a dork then, because I think I might get a kick out of it. And look, there is no tangible measure as what constitutes an Olympic hopeful. But I joke all the time. So I'm an Olympic hopeful for Brisbane 2032? I'd be coming in a Zimmer frame. And and there's nobody says I can't be hopeful of being in the Olympics. There isn't a 1 in a million chance that I ever would. But I just get a kick out of it. I'm just having fun. I'm an Olympic hopeful for Brisbane 2030.
Absolutely.
You gotta have some fun, right?
Absolutely. And Mark, in terms of you work and you're a professional and expert in this mental health space, why do you think the statistics are showing today that we're struggling with mental health? What have you come up with some answers to that?
It's a complex and difficult answer. And I think there isn't one answer to it. And if I had to sort of corral it and bring a rope around all the reasons why, I just think because we're confronted with too much, too much of everything, too much information. We spoke a little while ago about the millions of bits of information that come into our head, as in BYTES, not BITS. The volume of information that comes into us that we have to process, we take in more in a day than somebody 150 years ago would have taken in a lifetime. All of the things that demand our attention, even and as we say, 10 bits per second is what we're processing. So there's tons of stuff going on that we're not even aware of, but that we're taking in and we have to process. I think there's just too much of it. I think that's a huge part of it. Measure engagement all the time, and I think Zach Mercurio made a statement. He did it on he did a LinkedIn post, I'm saying today, which isn't going to mean anything to people who are listening to this later on. Where are we? We're in January 2025, and he said Gallup had just put out a new employee engagement research that sort of said that engagement in the workplace has hit a 10-year low, despite all of the surge of perks and wage increases and platforms and coaches and books and surveys on engagement and bringing people back to the office and hybrid working and all the things that matter. All of that stuff that we've been using to increase engagement, and we're at a 10-year low. So there's something going on, and I think Mercurio nails it when he says we're measuring engagement. That's a lagging response to how people feel. So we shouldn't be measuring engagement. We should be measuring connection, belonging, relationship, mattering, the sort of things that happen on a day-to-day basis when people are interacting. Because if they're not happy or content or in any kind of a joyful state, then those relationships and connections will give you the information you need to know. So stop measuring stuff that's already being created. It's like slamming the gate because the horse is bolted. Happy horses don't bolt, I think something like 40% of people feel like somebody cares about them in the workplace. 60% of people don't. That's too low a number. And I talk with leaders and I talk about mental health in the workplace, and of course it's always about all of this. Jen Marr, is a researcher and expert in the US. And she has some research that says 80% of us, you and me, 80% of us, reckon we can spot when somebody is struggling with their mental health, or they're unhappy, or they're anxious, or they're traumatized, or whatever it is. And yet 80% of people who are struggling feel that nobody can see them. How the hell is there that big a gap? If we're that good at seeing it, how the hell are we missing, or why are 80% of people thinking that they're not being seen or noticed or cared about? And 75% of those people really wish they could have a deeper conversation about it, but they think nobody's watching or listening or cares. When do we stop caring? And what's it cost us? And why the hell are we measuring engagement, the lagging response? It's like, measuring limping to determine how many broken legs are out there,
But like going back to that, you're saying that people are overwhelmed with an amount of information that's coming into their daily life. And I'm thinking in that overwhelm, people are just too busy doing, as opposed, because ultimately care is when you give the person time and space. And so like they feel cared and valued when you're sitting with them and purely present and connected with them and engaged in terms of what they're saying, and actively listening. And that's hard to do when there's so many distractions. And so I could really see the disconnect in terms of the statistics and why we're struggling so much based on what you just shared, because it's like in terms of experiencing happiness and joy, it's really difficult when you're feeling overwhelmed and like you've got so much weight on your shoulders and you're thinking, I just want a lighter load, I just want less. And
yeah, so it is, find something that gives you joy. And obviously, of course, if somebody is that overwhelmed, slowing down, I'm sure you've spoken about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous, two parts of the autonomic nervous system, which is a part of our central nervous system. It's our fight or flight response, which is sympathetic. And how I sort of explain it to people is it's our nervous system going out in sympathy with us when we're when we're in danger or overwhelmed or something's not good, right? So that's the sympathetic nervous system. Fight or flight. Actually, fight, flight, freeze, fold, and fawn, there's 5 Fs now. But they're basically our sort of immediate automatic response to a sense of danger that we're in. And that's a very ancient system. And it stood us in great stead all the way up till today in keeping us safe. But as somebody once pointed out, the things that we're fearful of, things like snakes, heights, big animals, whatever like that, there are sort of primary fear responses. And yet we're way more likely to be killed by guns, traffic, electricity, modern inventions. But we have no inherent fear of those. So it's an ancient system that keeps us safe, and it errs on the side of caution, which is why it hasn't had to develop and grow. But there are things that are happening to us that we're not aware that are not good for us. And so that sympathetic nervous system is constantly on, and it's supposed to only kick in for a few, momentary, and then we go back into the rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. And I say para like a paramedic coming to rescue us and keep us safe. So that's how people can remember the two. But we should be living far more in the parasympathetic nervous system. Rest, digest, feed and breed kind of thing. But we're not. We're spending way too much time in that heightened space with cortisol and adrenaline coursing through our bodies, which we don't burn off like an animal does. If you've ever seen a dog who will vigorously shake after they've just been in a fight, or a gazelle that escapes the lion, if they keep the camera on it long enough, you'll see it vigorously shaking itself. Those animals have the ability to burn off that sort of excessive adrenaline and cortisol. We don't. We have the mental capacity to say, what if? Or what if it comes back? What if there's 2 of them? What if I don't make it home safely? And so it keeps it in our system. And when we don't burn it off or use it, then it becomes toxic. And so we have all of these inflammation and cardiovascular challenges, etc., digestive issues, renal overload, cortisol sort of overload, all of those things that we have as a result of being overwhelmed too much, causing all sorts of illnesses for us because we're not getting into that parasympathetic nervous system. And parasympathetic is where, when you're having joy and fun and play, you'll be in that space, or just even breathe for a couple of minutes. You know, people often would say, I'm totally anxious, what should I do? And I say, well, we start with breathing. You know, slow your breathing down. That's how your brain learns that you're not in danger anymore. And it brings you into the present moment. And people say, breathing, what? Is that all you've got? You know, you're an expert. And that's actually all any of us have, quite frankly. You know, and if you get good at it, then what you'll find is that your anxiety and overwhelm is greatly diminished. So, joy, happiness, absolute must-haves. Slow down and sort of smell the flowers, absolutely have to happen as well. So these could be all things you're adding into your day rather than taking away from.
It's interesting in like today's world where people have that sort of response to some therapy or treatment that you've shared. It, like when I look at health, it all comes down to doing the fundamentals and the basics, right? But we sort of think that it needs to be complicated, or it needs to be something super
outside of us that's an instant fix.
Yeah.
There must be a tablet or an app for it by now. No, everything we need to survive we have within us. Now that's true until it's not. Sometimes we need some help. But there's a process called homeostasis, which is our sort of pursuit. That's going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once we've achieved something, we look for what else we can now improve. And we go like that. And that's our body, homeostasis, looking for that level of sort of safety and contentment and forward momentum that keeps us well. So it's designed, we all have it. We're probably the only animal on the planet that doesn't know how to feed itself. Actually, we do know, it's just we don't pay attention, right? And we get overwhelmed and we have desires and, chocolate fixations and sugar addictions and all of that sort of stuff. But, 3 times as many of us will die of too much food than not enough. Now, that's a sobering bloody fact, isn't it? So, it's, we have to, I think, get back to basics, as you say. And we have it all. We all have whatever we need within us to be the best version of ourselves. You don't need outside, creations. That's true until it's not. Sometimes we do. And as a psychotherapist, I would never have, gotten anywhere if people didn't need some kind of support. But I've never given somebody anything other than shining a light on what they already have for their own self-care and recovery and well-being.
It's just
with the exception of medicine.
It to their conscious awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because their consciousness is overwhelmed by all the input. It can't deal with all of it.
As I say, sometimes we do need external support. Yes, I'm a big, advocate of depression, anxiety medication when it's needed, But I say to people, it doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to manage and control to some extent ourselves. I think we all have what we need.
And is there anything that you think about happiness that you believe is unanswered, that we just don't know?
Ooh, I've never thought about that. Because based on what I just said, we have everything we need inside of us, then instinctively it should come to the fore when we need it. If we stop and listen to ourselves. Gosh, is there anything that we haven't thought of? No, I can't think of anything. Well, I suppose if I could, then we would have thought of it. But yeah, but you know what I mean?
I totally hear you, and you've covered a lot in terms of the foundations of happiness, contentment, and joy, and fulfillment, and what brings that, and how we can foster more of that. So I really appreciate all your insights. It's been a very thorough and enlightening conversation.
I've enjoyed myself immensely.
That's good.
Thanks, Evan. Actually, I was going to say one thing, and this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but it's kind of not, because we're going to give something away to your viewers and listeners for free. So I've written this book. It's called Up Yours, The Pursuit of Radical Self-Care. And I talk in there about many of the things we've been speaking about just now. And, it's available for people who want to buy the hard copy, but we're giving away the digital copy to anybody that wants it. It's a free download. As I said to you in the beginning, I write books to give away. My accountant hates me for it, but I just do. You can see them behind my head. I write them to give away, just sharing what I can with people and hopefully give somebody some enlightenment and joy. So, yeah. Just like Absolutely. You're doing with your wonderful podcast. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for that generous offer of yours, and I'll certainly include that link in the show notes so the listeners can go directly to there. And how else can the listeners connect with you?
Oh, very good question. Oh, look, just you can see my name on the screen there. So it's Mark Butler. So just markbutler.au will take you to my website, and any other information you need about me, you'll find on there. My phone number, my email. I'm Captain Contactable. You'll get me there. You get me on social media. You'll find me all over the place. And you might be sorry you do. But yeah, anybody that wants to get in touch, I'm always up for the chat.
And thank you for your time, and I'm just wondering whether your dog's made its way to the sofa.
No, he's curled up. He's right on. Yeah, he's on the ground.
Engaged in the conversation. Really interested in what you had to say today.
It's nothing he hasn't heard before. My dog and my dashboard in the car are the two things that know more about what I do than anybody else, I reckon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again, Mark. I really appreciate your time, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. Please share it with others that you believe that could get so much value from Mark's insights around happiness, joy, and contentment. Please spread it far and wide, and thank you for listening.